I was losing my mind. Like, that lean shit got me up. Like, I was just always irritated.
What you do to Bow Wow? That's what I want to know, man. What you do to Bow Wow, man? Cause
What the you do to Bow Wow?
he was just fine when he was with Snoop.
Jermaine Dupri, king of the pedophiles, if you ask me, baby.
Remember Bow Wow? What happened to him is darker than we feared. Hollywood promised him everything at 6 years old, but by the time he turned 18, Shad Moss was drowning in lean, collapsing on stage, and threatening to expose the industry secrets that made him.
And, you know, it was kind of like, start off like, well, let me take some of yours. And then next thing you know, a week later, it's make me my own. And then after that, it's I'm pouring my own. Like, my mind wasn't addicted to it, but my body was addicted to it.
The same child who once commanded stages alongside Snoop Dogg was now desperately faking private jets on Instagram and getting arrested for domestic violence.
Developing this morning, rapper and actor Bow Wow is facing charges after he was arrested Saturday morning in Midtown. Bow Wow, whose real name is Shad Moss, reportedly got into a physical fight with a woman named Leslie Holden.
This is the story of how America's youngest rap sensation systematically destroyed himself, trying to escape the fame that consumed his childhood. So, let's get into it. 6-year-old Shad Gregory Moss stood on the concrete steps of a Los Angeles concert venue in 1993, clutching a homemade rap demo. His grandmother had driven him 3 hours from their Reynoldsburg, Ohio apartment, convinced her grandson had something special. She was right, but neither of them understood what that discovery would cost. Inside, Snoop Dogg was preparing for his performance when security brought the persistent kid backstage. Most adults would have sent the child away, but something about Shad's confidence caught Snoop's attention. The boy wasn't nervous. He wasn't starstruck. He rapped like he belonged there, like the stage was his birthright. Snoop gave him a new name that night, Lil Bow Wow. Within weeks, Shad was appearing on Snoop's Doggy Style album, performing on the Arsenio Hall show, and starring in the Gin and Juice music video. The transformation happened so fast that Teresa Caldwell, Shad's mother, barely had time to process what was happening to her son. The child who had started rapping at 3 years old was suddenly traveling the country with Death Row Records artists, learning the music business from some of its most dangerous figures. While other 6-year-olds were learning to tie their shoes, Shad was memorizing verses, perfecting his stage presence, and absorbing the unwritten rules of an industry that didn't typically welcome children. Death Row's offices weren't designed for kids. The hallways buzzed with conversations about street politics, drug deals, and violence that would later consume the label. But Shad adapted quickly, understanding instinctively that his survival depended on proving he could handle whatever the adults threw at him. Suge Knight, Death Row's notorious CEO, took a particular interest in the young rapper. Shad would later remember Knight as someone who treated him like an equal, never talking down to him or treating him like a novelty act.
Lil Bow Wow, I gave him his name, had a family living in LA, paid for his tutoring, did the whole nine.
This early exposure to industry power players taught Shad that respect had to be earned, not given. The recording sessions were Shad's real education. While other children were in school learning multiplication tables, he was in studios, learning how to layer vocals, how to work with producers, and how to command attention in rooms full of adults. The technical skills he absorbed during these early years would later make him indispensable to producers who appreciated his professionalism. By age 7, Shad had appeared in multiple music videos and performed at venues across the country. His mother tried to maintain some normalcy, enrolling him in regular school when his schedule allowed. But the entertainment industry was already reshaping his understanding of childhood. The money started flowing almost immediately. Record executives saw dollar signs in Shad's combination of natural talent and marketable innocence. But the financial success created new pressures as family members began depending on his earnings, and industry figures started making long-term plans for his career. Snoop's mentorship opened doors, but it also introduced Shad to adult vices at an age when most children are still learning right from wrong. The line between childhood and entertainment commodity was already blurring, setting the stage for the darker chapters that would follow in Atlanta. In 1998, 11-year-old Shad Moss walked into Jermaine Dupri's Atlanta studio, carrying the weight of 5 years in the music industry. Dupri, fresh off his success with Criss Cross and Escape, saw something different in the young rapper who had already worked with Death Row Records. This wasn't another kid with dreams. This was a seasoned performer who understood the business better than most adults.
And you ended up signing him
When he was 12.
when he was 12.
Yeah.
Now, I had heard that Suge Knight kind of had an issue with you signing Bow Wow.
5, 12.
Yeah, but we're talking about...
I just gave it to you, so you even...
Dupri's So-So Def recordings operated like a family, but it was a family with very specific rules about hierarchy and loyalty. Shad, now calling himself Lil Bow Wow, found himself at the center of Dupri's vision for youth-oriented hip-hop. The producer saw an opportunity to create a crossover star who could appeal to both children and adults, bringing rap music into suburban households that had previously been off limits. The Atlanta music scene in the late 1990s was intoxicating for a preteen. The city's studios operated around the clock, with established artists, producers, and hangers-on creating a constant party atmosphere. Shad absorbed everything: the creative process, the business negotiations, the lifestyle choices that seemed normal when surrounded by adults who treated excess as a standard operating procedure.
Been scarred ever since. Exactly. What? Yeah. Exactly. I don't have to do with it.
Dupri took his role as mentor seriously, but his definition of mentorship included exposing Shad to aspects of adult life that would later haunt the young performer. Strip clubs, late-night recording sessions, and industry parties became regular parts of Shad's routine. When Shad begged to accompany the older artists to Atlanta's notorious adult entertainment venues, Dupri struggled with how to handle a 12-year-old who refused to be left behind. The power dynamic between Dupri and Shad was complicated from the beginning. Shad wasn't just another artist on the roster. He was the label's primary revenue generator and biggest star. This gave him unusual leverage for someone his age, but it also created resentment among other artists who felt overshadowed by a child. Recording sessions became Shad's primary social interaction. While other teenagers were forming friendships at school, he was collaborating with adult producers and artists who treated him like a peer when the microphone was on, but remembered he was a child when it came time to make real decisions about his life and career. The creative process during this period was electric. Shad was developing his own artistic identity while learning from some of the industry's most successful hitmakers. Songs like Bounce With Me emerged from these collaborations, showcasing Shad's ability to create music that felt both age-appropriate and commercially viable. But success brought new forms of isolation. The more popular Lil Bow Wow became, the harder it became for Shad to maintain normal relationships with people his own age. School became increasingly irrelevant as his entertainment career demanded more time and energy. The few teenagers in his orbit were either other industry kids dealing with similar pressures or fans who saw him as a celebrity rather than a peer. Dupri's protection felt both nurturing and suffocating. The producer controlled most aspects of Shad's career, making decisions about everything from song selection to public appearances. This level of management was necessary for a child performer, but it also prevented Shad from developing the independence that most teenagers gradually acquire as they mature. Atlanta's music industry operated on its own moral code, where success justified almost any behavior, and money solved most problems. For a teenager absorbing these lessons daily, the boundaries between right and wrong became increasingly blurred, setting the foundation for the self-destructive choices that would define his adult years. By 13, Shad Moss was no longer just a novelty act. He was a certified pop culture phenomenon. His debut album, Beware of Dog, had gone double platinum. His face was plastered across magazine covers, and every major network wanted him for interviews. But behind the success, the psychological pressure of carrying an entire record label's expectations was beginning to crack his foundation. The promotional cycle for his early albums was relentless. Morning show appearances, radio interviews, photo shoots, and concert performances filled every day, leaving little time for the normal teenage experiences that might have grounded him. While his peers were worried about homework and dating, Shad was analyzing sales figures and planning world tours.
So, do you do chores?
No, not really.
You mean your mama doesn't have you doing chores?
Can we have a maid at home?
School became an afterthought, replaced by tutors who traveled with the touring entourage. These educators focused primarily on meeting minimum legal requirements rather than providing comprehensive education. Shad's real learning happened in recording studios and boardrooms, where he absorbed lessons about power, money, and manipulation that no curriculum could teach. The financial success was intoxicating, but isolating. At an age when most teenagers are receiving allowances, Shad was generating millions of dollars for multiple record labels, production companies, and promotional partners. This economic power created an illusion of adult autonomy, while actual decision-making remained firmly in the hands of his management team. Television and film opportunities multiplied as Shad's brand expanded beyond music. Movies like Mike showcased his natural charisma and acting ability, but they also reinforced his image as America's perfect child entertainer.
What's the matter?
I'm done, Trace.
What do you mean?
It really wasn't me that was playing. It was the sneakers.
The pressure to maintain this wholesome persona while dealing with normal teenage emotions and impulses created an internal tension that would later explode publicly. Fan interactions became increasingly surreal. Thousands of screaming girls would mob his appearances, treating him like a teen heartthrob despite his young age. These experiences fed his ego while simultaneously alienating him from authentic relationships. How could he trust whether people liked Shad the person or Lil Bow Wow the celebrity?
Them strippers was outside the club, on the street, dancing for this nigga in a truck.
The entertainment industry's adult gatekeepers treated Shad with a mixture of indulgence and exploitation. They celebrated his professionalism and work ethic while simultaneously profiting from his inability to fully understand the contracts and agreements that governed his career. Every smile in every photo shoot was potentially worth millions to someone else. Behind the scenes, family dynamics were shifting under the pressure of Shad's success. Relatives who had previously been absent suddenly wanted relationships, while longtime family friends began treating interactions with economic calculation. The teenage boy who had once been the center of a loving family was now the center of a business empire. Media training taught Shad to present perfect answers to every question, but it also disconnected him from his authentic voice. The spontaneous, confident child who had impressed Snoop Dogg was being replaced by a carefully managed brand persona that prioritized marketability over honesty. Atlanta's hip-hop scene offered temporary escape from the manufactured perfection of his public image. In recording studios and at industry parties, Shad could experiment with edgier music and more adult themes. But these environments also introduced him to substances and behaviors that would later become coping mechanisms when the pressure became unbearable. The foundation was being laid for a spectacular fall. Every success raised the stakes higher. Every achievement created greater expectations. And every public appearance reinforced an image that was becoming impossible to maintain as Shad approached adulthood with no roadmap for transitioning from child star to authentic artist. The transformation from Little Bow Wow to Just Bow Wow in 2003 was supposed to represent artistic maturity, but instead, it marked the beginning of Shad's public rebellion against the machine that had created him. At 16, he was already exhausted by fame, frustrated by creative limitations, and desperate to prove he was more than a manufactured child star. The Unleashed album represented his first attempt to break free from Jermaine Dupri's creative control, but the process revealed how little autonomy he actually possessed.
Getting caught in the crossbeams, no preparation, medication, and vaccines, no reparation for the children who...
Every song choice, every collaboration, every promotional decision still required approval from a team of adults who prioritized commercial success over artistic authenticity. Shad felt like a prisoner in his own career. Touring had lost its excitement and become a grinding routine of identical performances in similar venues for crowds who wanted nostalgia rather than evolution. The screaming fans were no longer thrilling. They were reminders that the world refused to see him as anything other than the child they remembered. Each performance felt like a step backwards rather than forward. The business side of music was revealing itself as increasingly predatory. Contracts that had seemed generous when he was 13 now felt restrictive as he understood their long-term implications. Publishing deals, merchandising agreements, and touring contracts had locked him into obligations that would continue for years, regardless of his personal desires or artistic growth.
Kill yourself?
I was in a dark space.
What got you in that space?
Right in that third album point. Like right around the third album. That's when I was just done. I was just, my boys get on me because I like to sit in the house. And my answer and my response to that is because I've done everything.
Social media was beginning to emerge as a new form of surveillance and judgment. Every public appearance, every relationship, every creative choice was now subject to immediate public criticism from fans who felt ownership over his image and career direction. The intimate connection between performer and audience that had once felt special was becoming suffocating. Recording sessions became battles over creative control. Shad wanted to explore more mature themes and collaborate with edgier artists, but his management team worried about alienating the young fan base that generated most of their revenue. Every artistic impulse was filtered through market research and demographic analysis. Relationships became increasingly difficult to navigate as Shad struggled to separate genuine connections from people who were attracted to his fame and wealth. Trust became a luxury he couldn't afford, as every friendship and romantic relationship carried the potential for public embarrassment or financial exploitation. The pressure to maintain his wholesome image while dealing with normal teenage impulses created a psychological split that would define his adult years. In public, he remained the polite, professional entertainer that America expected. In private, he was beginning to experiment with substances and behaviors that provided temporary escape from the constant scrutiny. Industry parties offered glimpses of a different kind of celebrity lifestyle, one where stars could be flawed, controversial, and human. These experiences planted seeds of rebellion against the sanitized persona that had made him famous, but was now making him miserable. Atlanta's hip-hop community provided temporary refuge from the teen pop world, but it also introduced him to a culture where excess was celebrated and self-medication was normalized. The lean that was casually consumed at recording sessions seemed like harmless fun compared to the psychological pressure of maintaining perfect public behavior. Financial success had provided material comfort, but emotional isolation. Despite earning millions, Shad felt increasingly disconnected from the joy that had originally drawn him to music. The craft that had once been his passion was becoming just another obligation in a schedule controlled by other people's priorities. The stage was set for more dramatic forms of rebellion as Shad approached adulthood with no healthy coping mechanisms and a growing resentment toward the industry that had consumed his childhood. By 2007, 18-year-old Shad had discovered that lean offered something no amount of fame or money could provide: temporary freedom from the constant pressure of being Bow Wow. The purple syrup mixed with soda became his daily companion, transforming recording sessions into hazy escapes and turning public appearances into barely controlled disasters.
And, it was kind of like, start off like, well, let me taste some of yours. And then next thing you know, a week later, it's make me my own. And then after that, it's I'm pouring my own. Like, my mind wasn't addicted to it, but my body was addicted to it.
The Face Off album with Omarion was recorded entirely under the influence of lean. Shad was consuming the codeine-based mixture 7 times daily, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic as the drug altered his personality and decision-making abilities. The creative partnership that should have been a career highlight became a documentation of his descent into addiction. Tour performances became dangerous gambles as Shad took the stage while heavily medicated. The Cincinnati show with Chris Brown ended with him collapsing backstage and being rushed to the hospital, his body overwhelmed by the constant influx of codeine and promethazine. The official story blamed dehydration, but the reality was far darker. The hospitalization was a wake-up call that Shad chose to ignore. Withdrawal symptoms, nausea, sweating, shaking, and psychological despair felt worse than the original problems the lean was supposed to solve. Rather than seek help, he convinced himself that he could manage the addiction while continuing to perform and record.
I was losing my fucking mind. Like, that lean shit got me up. Like, I was just always irritated.
Professional relationships began deteriorating as Shad's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. The polite, professional young man that industry executives had worked with for years was being replaced by someone who was angry, paranoid, and unreliable. The lean wasn't just affecting his health. It was destroying his reputation. The lean addiction was transforming from a coping mechanism into a prison more restrictive than fame had ever been. What had started as rebellion against industry control was now controlling him more completely than any record contract or management agreement ever had. Recovery would require confronting not just the chemical dependency, but the underlying psychological trauma of having his childhood consumed by an industry that prioritized profit over human development. The path back to health would be longer and more difficult than the descent into addiction. The 2017 private jet scandal represented the perfect collision of Bow Wow's growing desperation and social media's merciless exposure. At 30, Shad was still trying to project an image of success while dealing with financial problems, career stagnation, and the psychological aftermath of his lean addiction. The fake Instagram post wasn't just a lie, it was a cry for help that nobody recognized.
Social media storm. He posted this picture. Now here's Bow Wow. He also goes to Shad Moss. Here's the picture that we saw yesterday on Instagram. Looks like he got off his car, went into his Gulfstream 5 there, and he wrote, "Travel day, NYC press run for growing up hip hop." It's like
the humiliation was immediate and devastating. Within hours, the internet had exposed his deception, creating the hashtag Bow Wow Challenge that turned his attempt at image management into a global joke. For someone who had spent decades carefully managing his public persona, the viral mockery felt like the final destruction of whatever credibility he had left. But the private jet scandal would be followed by even more serious legal troubles that would threaten not just his career, but his freedom, as the pattern of self-destructive behavior that had started with lean addiction continued to escalate despite his attempts at sobriety. February 2nd, 2019 began like any other night in Atlanta's party scene, but it would end with Shad Moss in handcuffs. his mugshot revealing scratch marks across his face, and the complete collapse of whatever dignity he had managed to preserve after the private jet humiliation. The domestic violence arrest wasn't just another scandal. It was evidence that his self-destructive patterns had escalated to include physical confrontation.
Developing this morning, rapper and actor Bow Wow is facing charges after he was arrested Saturday morning in Midtown. Bow Wow, whose real name is Shad Moss, reportedly got into a physical fight with a woman named Leslie Holden.
The fight with Kiyomi Leslie at his Midtown Atlanta apartment stemmed from jealousy over her interactions with another man at a Super Bowl party. But the underlying causes ran much deeper. Years of unresolved trauma from his childhood in the entertainment industry, combined with the psychological damage from his lean addiction and recent public humiliations, had left Shad emotionally unstable and prone to explosive behavior. Police body camera footage would later reveal the chaos of that early morning confrontation. Both Shad and Kiyomi bore visible injuries, and neither could provide a coherent account of who had initiated the violence. The apartment was destroyed, furniture was overturned, and the physical evidence suggested a prolonged and brutal altercation between two people who had lost complete control. The arrest photos told the story that publicists couldn't spin away. Shad's face was covered in scratches, his eyes were red and unfocused, and his expression suggested someone who had finally hit rock bottom. The image of America's former child star looking broken and defeated would become the lasting visual representation of his fall from grace. Bow Wow's mugshot would become the defining image of his legacy, replacing memories of the cute child rapper with evidence of the damaged adult he had become. The most tragic aspect of Shad's story wasn't the loss of fame or money. It was the complete absence of any authentic identity underneath the celebrity persona that had been constructed around him. After 3 decades in the public eye, he still didn't know who he was when the cameras stopped rolling. The entertainment industry had extracted everything of value from his childhood and adolescence, leaving him with nothing but memories of success and the knowledge that his best years were already behind him, before he was old enough to vote. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.